The fluorescent buzz of the diner still echoed in Lillian's ears as she locked up for the night, her hands aching from hours of chopping onions and scrubbing counters. She adjusted the strap of her worn canvas bag over her shoulder, stuffing her tips, just barely enough for groceries, into the pocket of her jacket. It was late, too late, and she knew she should have caught the bus, but the thought of Ivy sleeping alone in their apartment made her walk faster. The city hummed around her, neon lights flickering above sidewalks littered with stories she'd never know. The air smelled like damp pavement and the lingering scent of garlic from a nearby pizzeria. She turned the corner onto a quieter street, her pace quickening as she fumbled for her keys in her bag. Just a few more blocks. Ivy was waiting, probably curled up with her worn-out copy of Charlotte's Web, her small hands gripping the pages the way she held on to everything in their world, tightly, protectively. A gust of wind whipped through the intersection as the traffic light flicked from green to yellow. She glanced both ways, stepping onto the crosswalk, her thoughts already on the dinner she'd throw together with whatever scraps were left in the fridge. Eggs, maybe. Ivy loved breakfast for dinner. The headlights came fast, too fast. A sleek black car tore through the intersection, the growl of the engine drowning out the city's noise. For a second, there was nothing but the shocking brightness of it, the impossible speed, the way time stretched and folded in on itself. Then, the impact. A strange silence settled before the world rushed back in. Her body felt weightless, a fleeting sensation of being lifted, of being carried somewhere far from the cold pavement. Lillian's eyes fluttered open to an unfamiliar ceiling, high and adorned with intricate molding that seemed too delicate, too pristine. The air smelled different, something clean, expensive. Her fingers curled against the softness beneath her. Sheets. Not the rough polyester blend of her own bed, but something smoother, heavier. Panic surged through her, sharpening her senses. She bolted upright, her breath ragged. The room was massive, floor-to-ceiling windows revealing a skyline she had only seen in glossy magazine spreads. She was in a penthouse. She twisted, looking for something familiar, anything to ground her. The bed was king-sized, covered in crisp white linens. A fireplace flickered along the far wall, the golden glow bouncing off marble floors. Everything screamed wealth, excess. Her heart pounded as the door eased open. A man stepped inside, barefoot, dressed in a loose white shirt and dark slacks, sleeves rolled up as if he had just finished sipping an evening scotch. His presence commanded the room effortlessly, the kind of confidence that came from a life lived among power and privilege. He approached the bed, and before she could move, before she could demand to know where she was, he leaned down and pressed a kiss to her forehead. "Morning, darling." His voice was smooth, familiar in a way that sent ice down her spine. Lillian's breath caught. She had no idea who he was. The sheets tangle around Lillian's legs as she scrambles backward, her breath coming in sharp, ragged gasps. The man, Sebastian, he called himself, takes a step closer, his brow furrowing. "Clara, what's wrong?" "Clara." She doesn't know a Clara. She knows Lillian Hart, single mother, line cook, woman who barely scrapes by but always makes it home to read Ivy a bedtime story. "Who are you?" Her voice is raw, her throat tight. Sebastian's frown deepens, and he takes another cautious step toward her. "Clara, it's me. It's Sebastian. Just breathe, all right?" The calm in his tone makes something inside her snap. She flings the sheets off, her feet hitting the plush carpet with a jarring softness. This isn't real. This can't be real. Her body feels fine. Not a scratch, not a bruise, not the sharp pain she should have from being hit by a car. The last thing she remembers is headlights, the impossible speed, the feeling of weightlessness, and now, this. She scans the room, looking for answers. It's enormous, elegant, decorated in shades of ivory and gold. A chandelier glows above them, its crystal strands swaying slightly as if she's disrupted the air itself. The furniture is expensive in a way she can't even process, all clean lines and polished surfaces. A mirror stands near the door. Something about it pulls her toward it, dread curling in her stomach like a tight fist. She moves without thinking, drawn by the need for something familiar, something to prove she's still her. The face staring back isn't wrong, but it isn't quite right either. Her hands hover near her jaw, tracing over the slight differences. Her cheekbones are a touch sharper, her lips fuller, her skin smoother, as if someone had taken an airbrushed version of her and made it real. The hair is close to the same deep brown, but shinier, sleeker. Her eyes, the same hazel she's always had, hold a flicker of something she doesn't understand. She stumbles back, shaking her head. No. No, no, no. Sebastian reaches for her, but she flinches away. Clara, please. You're scaring me. Before she can snap at him that she is the one who's terrified, a knock sounds at the door. A woman in a crisp black uniform steps inside, balancing a silver tray with a steaming cup of coffee and a plate of toast. She moves with effortless grace, not a trace of hesitation as she sets the tray on a marble-topped table near the window. Good morning, Mrs. Laurent, the woman says with practiced ease. Would you like me to draw your bath now? The words land like a slap. Mrs. Laurent. Sebastian Laurent. She doesn't just have a new face. She has a husband. The air feels thinner, the room closing in. She shakes her head, gripping the edge of the dresser as if she might slip away entirely. I'm not, she swallows the words, unsure what to say. That she isn't Clara? That this is some kind of mistake? That she's trapped in a body that isn't hers? Sebastian places a hand on her shoulder, steady but careful. Maybe you should sit down, okay? You had a terrible accident. Maybe you're just confused. The housekeeper glances between them, her expression unreadable, as if this is an entirely normal morning. Lillian looks at her, searching for something, recognition, doubt, suspicion, but finds nothing. Where's Ivy? The question bursts out before she can stop it. Sebastian blinks. Ivy? My daughter, she says, her voice rising. Where is she? The housekeeper stills, the tray in her hands momentarily forgotten. Sebastian's expression shifts into something softer, something that looks dangerously close to pity. Clara, he says gently. We don't have a daughter. The words slam into her, her breath hitching. No, I have a daughter, she insists, gripping the dresser behind her for support. She's 8. She sleeps with the night light on because she hates the dark. She loves blueberry pancakes, even though she picks out the blueberries. She's mine. Sebastian exhales slowly, running a hand through his hair. Sweetheart, you must have hit your head harder than we thought. Maybe we should call Dr. Monroe. No, I don't need a doctor, she snaps, frustration bubbling over. I need someone to tell me where my daughter is. Sebastian and the housekeeper exchange a look. It's brief but loaded, the kind of silent communication people share when deciding how to deal with someone who's lost their grip on reality. I think she needs some rest, the housekeeper says softly, her voice gentle. Lillian feels the weight of their stares, the quiet judgment settling over her like a heavy coat. This is how it starts, isn't it? People thinking she's unwell, that she's making things up. The doubt creeping in, the way their concern begins to shift into something else entirely. She shakes her head, stepping back toward the mirror. The reflection is still wrong, still not her, but her mind refuses to piece together anything else. She has two choices: keep fighting, screaming, demanding someone believe her. Or, play along. At least until she figures out what's going on. Her voice wavers as she forces a breath into her lungs. I think I need some air. Sebastian studies her, hesitant. Are you sure? Maybe you should. I'm fine, she lies. I just need a second. He doesn't look convinced, but he nods. All right. I'll be in my office if you need anything. The housekeeper lingers for a moment before stepping out, leaving Lillian alone with a name that isn't hers, a body that doesn't belong to her, and the crushing realization that her daughter is gone. The sound of heels clicking against marble carries through the penthouse before Lillian even sees her. There is something purposeful about the way the footsteps approach, the rhythm unhurried yet precise, like someone accustomed to making people wait just long enough to feel small. A moment later, the woman steps into view, her sharp gaze sweeping the room before landing on her with a weight that feels both calculated and effortless. Natalia Laurent. Lillian knows the type, polished, poised, the kind of woman who never has to check price tags. She wears a fitted navy dress that somehow looks casual despite its impossibly structured tailoring. Her dark hair is pulled back into a sleek bun, her makeup understated but flawless. She doesn't sit. She doesn't have to. You look terrible, Natalia announces, tilting her head slightly. No offense, of course. Lillian doesn't respond right away, gripping the armrest of the couch as if it might keep her tethered to something real. Natalia watches her, waiting. There's no warmth in her stare, no trace of concern, just an unwavering intensity that makes Lillian's skin prickle. Sebastian exhales through his nose, clearly exasperated. Natalia. What? She lifts a delicate shoulder. She does. Sebastian pushes himself up from the chair across from them, walking toward the bar cart in the corner. She's recovering, he says, pouring something amber-colored into a glass. She hit her head in the accident. Natalia hums, unconvinced. So I've heard. It's all anyone is talking about. The mysterious crash, the miraculous recovery. Her eyes never leave Lillian's face. How are you feeling, Clara? There's something off about the way she says the name, like she's pressing down on it, testing its weight. Lillian forces a smile, hoping it looks effortless instead of like something she's borrowed. I'm fine. Natalia's lips curve, but there's nothing kind about it. You don't seem fine. Sebastian hands her a drink, but Lillian barely looks at it. She's too busy keeping her expression neutral, too busy trying to steady the erratic rhythm of her thoughts. Natalia is dangerous, maybe not in the way of men with power or influence, but in the way of people who are too smart for their own good. I was just about to step out, Lillian says, standing. Get some fresh air. Natalia's gaze flickers to Sebastian. She always does that, she says, as if Lillian isn't standing right there. Just disappears when things get uncomfortable. Sebastian sighs, rubbing the bridge of his nose. Could we not do this? Natalia ignores him. That's what you did before the accident, isn't it? Ran off somewhere? No one knew where you were going. Not even Sebastian. She sips her drink. What was it this time? Lillian's pulse kicks up. Before the accident. Clara had been planning to leave. Sebastian sets his glass down harder than necessary. Enough. Natalia raises an eyebrow but says nothing, just lifts her glass to her lips again. Lillian takes the moment of distraction and moves. The penthouse is sprawling, endless hallways lined with abstract art that probably costs more than everything she's ever owned combined. She keeps her pace slow, deliberate, as if she belongs here, as if she isn't trying to piece together a life that isn't hers. She steps into what looks like a study, dimly lit despite the floor-to-ceiling windows stretching along one side. A desk sits in the middle of the room, dark mahogany, expensive. Her fingers skim across it as she moves, searching. Drawers are locked. Of course, they are. She glances toward the hallway before turning toward the bookshelves, the ones filled with books she knows Sebastian has never read. Then, something catches her eye. A framed photograph, positioned slightly away from the others. Her breath hitches. It's her. Or, it's Clara. Dressed in an elegant white gown, a veil cascading over one shoulder. And Sebastian, beside her, looking impossibly polished in a black tuxedo. They are frozen in time, a perfect, smiling couple. She swallows hard, scanning the other frames. More of them. More of her, standing beside Sebastian, laughing at something out of frame, walking hand in hand through a garden she doesn't recognize. It's her face. But it's not her life. A sharp knock on the doorframe makes her jump. She turns quickly, the picture still clutched in her hand. Natalia leans against the doorway, watching her with something close to amusement. You look like you've seen a ghost. Lillian sets the photo down carefully, hoping Natalia didn't notice the slight tremble in her fingers. Just looking around. Natalia steps inside, glancing at the wedding photos without much interest. Strange, isn't it? Lillian's throat tightens. What? Natalia turns to her, her expression unreadable. Seeing yourself in places you don't remember. The words settle between them, heavy and knowing. Lillian forces a laugh, but it comes out wrong, unsteady. You're being dramatic. Natalia smiles, slow and sharp. Am I? Silence stretches between them, thick and charged. Then, Natalia tilts her head toward the door. Come on, Clara. Let's not keep Sebastian waiting. Lillian hesitates. Natalia doesn't believe her. She's not sure she even believes herself. Lillian's hands shake as she slides open the desk drawer, heart hammering so loudly she swears it echoes through the cavernous study. She has to find something, anything, that proves she is not Clara Laurent. The room is heavy with the scent of polished wood and leather, the kind of place where important decisions are made, where powerful men sign contracts that dictate the lives of people like her. She rifles through the papers, flipping through neatly stacked documents with Clara's name printed in bold, elegant letters. Financial statements, business correspondence, handwritten notes in a script that isn't hers. A framed photograph sits on the desk, her face, Clara's face, smiling back at her with a certainty Lillian has never felt in her life. She presses her lips together and shoves it aside. A small leather wallet is tucked near the back of the drawer. She snatches it up, breath catching as she flips it open. Clara Laurent. The ID stares back at her, crisp and official. The birthdate matches her own, the age is the same. Same height. Same hazel eyes. But this isn't her. Her pulse pounds in her ears. She is losing her mind. She pushes back from the desk, nearly knocking over the chair. Her breaths come in quick, shallow bursts, the walls pressing in. She snatches up the office phone and dials her own number, fingers trembling as she presses each digit. The dial tone hums. Then, nothing. No voicemail. No error message. It simply does not exist. She stares at the phone in disbelief, her fingers curling around the receiver as if sheer force of will could make the connection happen. She tries again, this time slower, carefully, as if precision could rewrite reality. But the same void answers her. Her stomach twists. She doesn't exist. She stumbles backward, gripping the edge of the desk. Ivy. What about Ivy? She dials her daughter's school. The number rings. A clipped voice answers, polite but distant. Greenwood Academy, how can I assist you? Lillian's throat is too tight. She clears it. I need to speak to the front office about my daughter. Ivy Hart. A pause. I'm sorry, could you repeat the name? She does. Another pause. There's no student by that name in our system. Are you sure you have the right school? Lillian lets out a broken breath. She's been there since kindergarten. She's in Miss Randall's 3rd grade class. The woman on the other end sighs, just a hint of patience thinning out. Ma'am, I'm looking at our records. There's no Ivy Hart enrolled here. The words hit like a fist to the ribs. She manages a weak thank you before hanging up. She presses her hands to her temples. Breathe. Think. There has to be an explanation, something logical. Her knees buckle before she even realizes what's happening. The floor tilts beneath her, the world fading to gray at the edges, the sound of her own breathing drowning out everything else. Then, nothing. A warmth cradles her, a presence solid and steady, the scent of cedar and something deeper, something familiar yet foreign. Lillian, a voice murmurs, low and raw. She forces her eyes open, blinking up at Sebastian's face hovering above hers. His brow is furrowed, concern darkening his gaze. She is on the couch, though she has no memory of getting there. He presses a cool cloth to her forehead, his fingers lingering against her cheek. "You scared me," he says, voice barely above a whisper. She stares at him, her body too weak to recoil from the way he holds her, the way his hand cradles the side of her face as if she is something fragile, something he is terrified of losing. "I don't know what's happening to you," he continues, eyes searching hers. "But I won't let you go." His words wrap around her, heavy and binding, and for the briefest moment, she lets herself sink into them, too exhausted to do anything else. The dress fits like it was made for her. Technically, it was. Or at least, it was made for Clara. The emerald silk drapes over her body effortlessly, its deep green hue catching the light every time she moves. It is elegant and understated, the kind of gown a woman wears when she knows she doesn't need sequins or jewels to make an impression. The zipper had glided up her back without resistance, as if the fabric itself recognized her, even when she didn't recognize herself. Lillian stares at her reflection in the mirror, adjusting an earring that feels unfamiliar, though she knows it must have been Clara's. Her hair has been styled in loose waves, tumbling over one shoulder in a way that suggests effortlessness, though she knows better. The makeup is flawless, lips painted in a muted red, just enough to make her look polished without trying too hard. She has spent days convincing herself to do this. If she keeps screaming about who she is, they will write her off as unwell. If she keeps fighting, she'll run out of options. The only way to find out what happened, what really happened, is to be Clara. To move like her, to listen, to pretend she belongs. The gala is held at a private estate, the kind of place that doesn't need an address because everyone who matters already knows where it is. The entrance is framed by massive stone pillars, warm light spilling out onto the manicured drive. Valets in pressed uniforms usher in guests as black cars roll up, one after another. Inside, the ceilings stretch high, gold chandeliers glittering above a room filled with old money and practiced smiles. She glides through the space, nodding when people acknowledge her, murmuring greetings as if she remembers them. Conversations hum around her, glasses clinking against each other in the kind of rhythm only the wealthy can orchestrate. Sebastian is across the room, deep in conversation with a group of men in tailored suits, nodding at something one of them says. His presence is effortless, his posture that of a man who has never had to second-guess his own importance. He hasn't hovered over her since they arrived, but she knows he's aware of her, his gaze flicking toward her more often than casual observation would justify. She takes a glass of champagne from a passing tray, more for something to do with her hands than anything else. The bubbles rise steadily, undisturbed, while her own pulse races beneath the surface. A cluster of women stand near a marble staircase, their voices hushed but sharp. Lillian slows her steps, tilting her head just enough to listen without looking like she's listening. Can't believe she showed up. She has some nerve. Well, of course she came. If she had actually gone through with it, none of this would be hers anymore. A clipped laugh. Maybe she hit her head harder than we thought. A slow swirl of ice in a glass. Or maybe she just realized she made a mistake. Lillian's fingers tighten around the stem of her flute. They're talking about Clara. Or rather, they're talking about her. She keeps moving, her breath even, her expression smooth. The pieces are shifting, rearranging themselves into something dangerous. Clara wasn't just living a perfect life before the accident. She was about to leave it. A hand brushes lightly against her arm. You shouldn't be here. Lillian turns, startled. A woman stands beside her, her face composed but her eyes sharp. She is older than Lillian, maybe late 40s, her dark hair styled into an effortless chignon. Her dress is sleek, black, understated in a way that makes it clear she doesn't have to prove anything. The diamonds at her throat catch the light, but they do not sparkle as brightly as her gaze, which is locked onto Lillian with quiet intensity. I'm sorry, Lillian says, careful. I don't think we've met. The woman's lips curve slightly, but the smile doesn't reach her eyes. Oh, Clara, she says, voice low. We've met. The words send a shiver down Lillian's spine. The woman glances toward the crowd, as if checking to see if anyone is watching them. Then she leans in, just enough for her next words to be meant only for Lillian. I know the truth. Lillian's breath catches. The woman takes a step back, turning gracefully toward an open hallway just off the main ballroom. She doesn't look over her shoulder. She doesn't have to. Lillian follows. The hallway is dimly lit, the muffled sounds of the gala fading with each step as Lillian follows the woman deeper into the quiet. The air feels heavier here, thick with the scent of aged wood and expensive perfume. The woman, Margot, she assumes, walks ahead without hesitation, her heels barely making a sound against the polished floor. They stop near a side door, and Margot finally turns. Up close, there's something unreadable about her, something knowing. She studies Lillian with the kind of sharpness that makes it clear she's weighing every detail, every hesitation. You really don't remember, do you? Lillian swallows. She could lie. She could say something vague, play into the persona of a woman who just suffered a terrible accident. But there's no point, Margot already sees through her. No, Lillian says. I don't. Margot exhales through her nose, something like frustration flickering across her face. Then, after a moment, she reaches into the small clutch tucked beneath her arm and pulls out a key. A simple silver key, no tag, no markings, just cold metal resting in her palm. You had a plan, Margot says. An entire life separate from this one. A place no one knew about. A way out. Lillian's fingers tighten around the fabric of her dress. Margot tilts her head slightly. You don't believe me? Then go see for yourself. She presses the key into Lillian's hand, closing her fingers around it. Go there. Find out who you really are. Lillian's pulse thrums beneath her skin as she stares down at the key. It's a tangible thing, something real in a life that suddenly feels anything but. When she looks up, Margot is already walking away, slipping effortlessly back into the party, as if nothing happened at all. Lillian doesn't sleep. She lies in bed staring at the ceiling, Sebastian's even breathing beside her a quiet reminder of the life she's supposed to be living. But the key is in the drawer of the nightstand, its presence impossible to ignore. Morning comes slow and heavy, the kind of morning where the air feels thick with something unspoken. She moves carefully, dressing in simple jeans and a sweater, something that doesn't belong in the curated wardrobe Clara left behind. Sebastian is already in his office, deep in some conversation, barely glancing up when she murmurs something about running errands. She takes a cab. She doesn't know where she's going, not really, but when she gives the address Margot had whispered at the last second, the driver nods like it's just another stop, another street in a city too big to notice her. The building is old but well maintained, tucked away in a quiet neighborhood that doesn't scream wealth but doesn't lack it either. There's no doorman, no concierge. Just a lobby with scuffed tile and a single elevator that groans slightly as it carries her to the 4th floor. The key slides in smoothly. The lock clicks open. Inside, the apartment is untouched. Lived in, but still. A coat draped over the back of the couch. A cup left upside down on the drying rack near the sink. A framed photo turned face down on the coffee table. This was hers. Or rather, it was Clara's. The walls are lined with bookshelves, not the kind for decoration but the kind actually used. There are novels with cracked spines, cookbooks stacked haphazardly, a small collection of records beside a vintage turntable. It's not cold, not curated. It feels real. She moves through the space slowly, trailing her fingers over the kitchen counter, the arm of a well-worn chair. In the bedroom, the closet is half empty. Suitcases sit in the corner, partially packed. A life that was preparing to leave. On the desk, there's an envelope. Her name is written on it. Not Clara Laurent. Not Mrs. Sebastian Laurent. Just Clara. Her fingers tremble as she picks it up. The paper is smooth, thick, expensive. Before she can open it, a voice slices through the silence. Well, this is interesting. Lillian whirls around. Natalia stands in the doorway, arms crossed, one perfectly arched brow raised. She's still in a tailored suit, like she came straight from some meeting where people bend to her will without question. I thought I'd follow you, Natalia says, stepping inside. And what do you know? Here you are, sneaking around in an apartment you were supposed to have given up. Lillian grips the envelope tighter, pulse hammering in her ears. Natalia exhales, shaking her head slightly. You never could just stay put, could you? Lillian doesn't move. She doesn't know what Clara would have said. But she knows one thing, she has to find out what's inside this letter. And she can't let Natalia stop her. Natalia steps farther into the apartment, her heels clicking against the hardwood like gunfire in the silence. She moves with the slow, deliberate confidence of someone who knows she's already won. Her gaze flicks over the half-packed suitcases, the overturned photograph, the letter still clenched in Lillian's hand. Well, she prompts, folding her arms. Go ahead. Open it. I'd love to see what exactly you were hiding here. Lillian's pulse pounds against her ribs. The weight of the envelope in her grip feels unbearable, like it might contain the answer to everything, or nothing at all. But she can't open it now, not with Natalia standing there, watching her like a hawk circling a wounded animal. I don't know what you think this proves, Lillian says, trying to steady her voice. Natalia laughs, the sound dry and sharp. Oh, please. Do you think I haven't noticed? She gestures around the apartment. This little secret hideaway of yours, did you think no one would ever find it? Or did you just assume Sebastian was too in love to question anything? Lillian sets the envelope down on the desk, careful, slow. She doesn't dare take her eyes off Natalia. I don't know what you're talking about. Oh, come on, Natalia scoffs, stepping closer. You don't even act like yourself anymore. 1 minute you're plotting to leave, and now you're playing the doting wife? She tilts her head, watching Lillian with unnerving scrutiny. You know what I think? I think you hit your head harder than we thought. And I think Sebastian deserves to know exactly what's going on. The words settle between them, thick and heavy. Lillian forces herself to hold her ground, but she knows the battle is already lost. Dinner that night is suffocating. The long, gleaming table stretches between them, the candles flickering in the dim light, casting shadows against the pristine white plates. Lillian barely touches her food. Across from her, Sebastian is tense, his hands resting on the table, fingers curled just slightly, like he's holding something back. Natalia sits beside him, poised, a quiet smirk playing at the edges of her lips. It's a performance. Lillian knows that much. But she doesn't know how it's going to end. Natalia places her napkin on the table with slow precision before turning to Sebastian. I've been patient, she says. Really, I have. But I think we both know something is wrong here. Sebastian exhales sharply. Natalia. No, let's talk about it. She leans forward slightly, directing her full attention to Lillian. "Why don't you tell him about the apartment?" Sebastian's gaze snaps to her, confusion flashing across his features. "What apartment?" Lillian's throat tightens. She should have been prepared for this, should have seen it coming. Natalia sighs, shaking her head. "She's been sneaking off, Sebastian. This morning, she left early, took a cab across the city." "And where did she go?" She picks up a tablet from her lap, swipes the screen, then turns it toward him. Lillian's stomach drops. On the screen is a security camera still, grainy but unmistakable. Her, standing in front of the apartment building. Another swipe. A second image of her disappearing inside. Sebastian's face darkens. "I didn't," Lillian starts, but Natalia cuts her off. "I followed her," Natalia continues. "She has a whole separate life stashed away. And if you ask me, it looks an awful lot like she was planning to disappear again." Sebastian pushes back from the table. "Is that true?" His voice is quiet, but there's something dangerous beneath it. Lillian opens her mouth, but nothing comes out. Natalia smiles. "See? She can't even deny it." Sebastian stands. His movements are slow, controlled, but his expression is unreadable. "You lied to me." "I didn't." "You did." His voice is sharp now, cutting through the quiet. "All this time, I've been trying to understand, trying to help you, and you were lying to me." Lillian feels the room closing in. She reaches for him, desperate. "Sebastian." He pulls back. "Get out." The words land like a slap. For a moment, everything is silent. Natalia watches, victorious. Sebastian turns away, as if he can't even look at her. "I don't know who you are anymore," he says. "Just leave." Lillian doesn't remember walking to the door. Doesn't remember stepping into the cold. She only knows she's outside, the wind cutting through her, the city pressing in from all sides. She walks. The pavement is slick beneath her heels. The night feels endless, the streets blurred by neon signs and the distant hum of traffic. The weight of it all crushes her, the lies, the things she doesn't understand, the life that isn't hers but somehow is. A flash. Not of headlights, but of something else. She wasn't alone in the car. She stops walking, the breath torn from her lungs. Someone was with her. Lillian doesn't remember the walk back to the apartment. She only knows that her hands are shaking as she slides the key into the lock, her breath tight in her chest as the door creaks open. The air inside is still untouched, stale in a way that makes it feel like time has been waiting for her to return. The letter is right where she left it, perched on the desk, her name, Clara's name, written in smooth, deliberate handwriting. She picks it up, fingers tracing the edge of the envelope. A part of her doesn't want to open it. A part of her already knows what's inside, the truth pressing against her ribs like something she's always known but never let herself admit. She slides her thumb under the flap and pulls out the thick sheet of paper inside. The handwriting is unmistakable. "If you're reading this, it means I'm gone." Lillian swallows hard, her pulse hammering in her ears as her eyes skim the rest of the words. "I should have left sooner. I should have walked away before it got this far. But I kept telling myself I had time. That I could fix things. That he wouldn't let it come to this. I was wrong. I don't know where I'll go, only that I can't stay. This life was never mine to begin with. If something happens to me, tell him I'm sorry." The paper slips from Lillian's fingers. Clara had been leaving. Not just thinking about it, not just considering it, she had already left. She was running. But something had gone wrong. A noise startles her from her thoughts. A sharp intake of breath. A presence in the room that wasn't there before. Margot. She stands in the doorway, her dark eyes locked onto Lillian, her posture rigid with something just short of alarm. "So, you finally read it," she says, stepping inside. She doesn't ask how Lillian got back here. She doesn't look surprised to find her. Lillian grips the edge of the desk. "Clara was leaving that night," she says, her voice barely above a whisper. "She wasn't in the accident. She was already gone." Margot's mouth tightens. "She was in the accident," she says carefully. "Just not in the way you think." Lillian shakes her head, the words knotting together in her brain. "I don't understand." Margot exhales sharply, her fingers digging into the back of the chair in front of her. "Clara disappeared that night. And then you woke up in her place." The room tilts. Lillian grabs onto the desk, as if holding onto something solid might make any of this make sense. "What are you saying?" she whispers. Margot doesn't blink. "I'm saying Clara is gone. And somehow, you took her place." The words settle between them, heavy and impossible. Lillian opens her mouth, then closes it. Her heartbeat pounds in her ears, her skin prickling with something cold and unshakable. "No," she says, shaking her head. That's not possible." Margot's expression softens, just slightly. "I don't know how it happened, but it did happen. Maybe it was the accident. Maybe it was something else. But one thing is certain, Clara was supposed to disappear that night, and now you're here instead." Lillian stares at her, her mind racing. "But where is she?" Margot looks away. It's a small thing, a flicker of hesitation, but it's enough. Lillian's stomach twists. "She's dead, isn't she?" Margot's silence is answer enough. Lillian presses a hand to her forehead, the room suddenly too warm, too bright. No, this doesn't make sense. Why me? Why would I wake up in her life? Margot's gaze sharpens. "That's what you should be asking yourself. Why you? Why not someone else?" The breath leaves Lillian's lungs in a rush. Margot steps closer, lowering her voice. "Someone wanted Clara dead. And if they find out you're not her, you're next." The penthouse is colder than she remembers. Maybe it's because she's been away, or maybe it's because she's seeing it differently now. The chandeliers don't glitter, they glare. The sleek marble floors seem less like luxury and more like something sterile, something lifeless. Sebastian is in his office, sitting behind his massive mahogany desk, looking like he's trying not to strangle the pen in his hand. When Lillian steps inside, he doesn't look up. "I told you to leave," he says, voice clipped. Lillian hesitates, gripping the edge of the doorway. "I know." Silence. He taps the pen twice against the desk, the sound cutting through the tension between them. "Then why are you here?" "Because she doesn't have a choice. Because Margot's words are still ringing in her ears. Because someone wanted Clara dead, and now they might want her dead, too. Because I know the truth," she says. Sebastian exhales sharply, tossing the pen onto the desk. "Do you?" He finally looks at her, his eyes dark with something unreadable. "Because I don't think you even know who you are anymore." Lillian's stomach twists. "I remember things," she says carefully. Sebastian scoffs. "Oh, do you?" He leans back in his chair, arms crossed. "Let me guess, you remember the time we went to the south of France? The restaurant where you said you'd never eaten anything better in your life? Or how you insisted on keeping that awful painting you found at a street market because you swore it meant something?" Lillian's throat tightens. She has no idea what he's talking about. But she has something else. "You keep your watch in the left drawer of your nightstand," she says. Sebastian stiffens. She presses forward. "You never sleep without it, except when you drink too much whiskey, and then you forget. You say you hate coffee, but you drink it black every morning, and if someone asks if you want cream, you just shake your head like the question doesn't deserve an answer. His fingers press against the desk, his jaw tightening. Lillian steps closer, voice steady. And you never take off your wedding ring. Not even in the shower. Not even when you go swimming. Except once. On our anniversary, when I dared you to throw it into the lake just to see how fast you could find it again. Sebastian stares at her. The room feels impossibly still. His hand moves instinctively to his ring, twisting it absent-mindedly the way he always does. You couldn't find it, she says softly. You had to call a diver to get it back. Sebastian swallows. It's working. But before he can respond, a voice cuts through the quiet. What a touching moment. Natalia. She's standing in the doorway, arms crossed, her perfectly tailored suit unwrinkled despite the tension practically rolling off her. Lillian doesn't have time for this. She turns back to Sebastian. I found something, she says. Proof that Clara was being set up. That's why she was trying to leave. Natalia's expression doesn't change, but something flickers in her eyes. Sebastian frowns. What are you talking about? Lillian reaches into her bag and pulls out the folder she found in Clara's apartment. Bank statements, emails, financial transfers, all of it leading back to one person. Natalia. Sebastian takes the papers, scanning them with growing disbelief. Natalia lets out a short laugh. This is ridiculous. Sebastian doesn't look at her. Is it? Natalia takes a step forward, her voice steady but sharp. Clara was unstable. She was paranoid. She thought everyone was out to get her, and now you're letting. Sebastian slams the folder onto his desk. Enough. Natalia falls silent. He looks at the papers again, his hands gripping the edges. When he finally lifts his gaze to Natalia, his expression is unreadable. You set her up, he says quietly. Natalia exhales through her nose, tilting her head slightly. You're being dramatic. Sebastian shakes his head. Clara was trying to escape. And you made sure she couldn't. Natalia doesn't deny it. Lillian watches as something shifts between them. Something unspoken but undeniable. Sebastian stands, his movements slow, deliberate. You knew, he says. You knew she was in danger. Natalia exhales, rolling her shoulders like she's shaking something off. Sebastian. Get out. Natalia stills. Sebastian's voice is low, firm. Now. For a moment, it looks like she might argue. That she might try to twist the situation in her favor. But then, after a long pause, she turns and walks out, her heels clicking against the floor in retreat. Sebastian doesn't move. Lillian watches him, waiting. Finally, he exhales, pressing his hands against the desk. Tell me everything. Sebastian doesn't speak for a long time. He just stands there, shoulders tense, staring at the stack of documents on his desk like they might rearrange themselves into something less damning if he looks hard enough. Lillian waits, pulse hammering in her ears, afraid to move, afraid to breathe too loudly in case it breaks whatever fragile thread is keeping him from pushing her out again. Finally, he exhales. Not a sigh, not quite. Something heavier. Something resigned. He presses the heels of his hands against the edge of the desk, as if steadying himself. I don't know how to make sense of any of this, he says. She knows the feeling. Sebastian runs a hand through his hair, his wedding ring catching the dim light. But I know Natalia. And if she's involved in something, she doesn't do it halfway. Lillian swallows. She's not just involved, she says. Clara knew something. She was running because of it. Sebastian looks at her then, really looks at her, like he's finally allowing himself to entertain the possibility that she's telling the truth. That she isn't Clara. That Clara is gone. He exhales sharply and shakes his head. If Natalia was setting her up. I need to know why. Lillian nods. She has spent too long stumbling through this, too long reacting instead of acting. I think Clara was investigating her. Sebastian frowns. Investigating? She didn't trust her, Lillian says. She must have found something. And if she did, it's somewhere in her files. Sebastian straightens. His expression shifts, sharpening, the businessman in him stepping forward. Natalia's files aren't easy to access. Lillian crosses her arms. You're telling me your own sister has secrets you don't know about? Sebastian doesn't look away. You'd be surprised. It turns out, Natalia's private office is even more intimidating than Sebastian's. It's cold, sterile, the kind of place designed to remind people who's in charge. The walls are lined with sleek cabinets, the desk immaculate except for a single silver pen placed perfectly parallel to the edge. No personal photos. No clutter. Just power, distilled into furniture. Sebastian moves with purpose, striding toward the computer. She's paranoid. If there's anything, it'll be hidden. Lillian watches as he types in a password, then another, his jaw tightening when the system grants him access. She never changed it. Sebastian lets out a short, humorless laugh. She never thought she had to. Lillian starts at the filing cabinet, skimming through thick folders. The labels are precise but vague: acquisitions, Q3, client relations, discretionary, expense reports. Nothing immediately screams blackmail material. Sebastian clicks through files on the screen. She's careful, he mutters. Anything worth hiding won't be in plain sight. Lillian pulls open another drawer. Then she sees it. A slim, unmarked folder tucked at the back. Inside, it isn't filled with the usual financial reports or corporate jargon. It's a collection of statements, carefully printed, organized. Personal transactions. And Clara's name is all over them. Sebastian glances over, eyes narrowing. What is that? Lillian's hands tighten around the pages. Money, she says. A lot of it. Transferred in and out of different accounts under Clara's name. Sebastian frowns. That doesn't make sense. Clara didn't handle finances. She barely touched her own credit cards. Lillian swallows. That's because she wasn't the one moving the money. She flips to another page. Look at the recipient names. Shell companies. Offshore accounts. Someone was embezzling through her. Sebastian exhales sharply. Natalia. The pieces start to click together. Clara found out. Maybe not everything, maybe not the whole scheme, but enough to be dangerous. Enough to make her a liability. Sebastian shakes his head, his fingers pressing into the desk. If this gets out, Natalia loses everything. Lillian looks at him. She already knew Clara was leaving. If she found out Clara had proof. Sebastian doesn't let her finish. He's already moving, grabbing his phone. I need to call. The security alarm shatters the silence. The shrill, blaring sound pulses through the office, drowning out everything else. The overhead lights flicker, the system locking down, the doors clicking shut automatically. Sebastian spins toward the screen, pulling up the security feed. A dark SUV has just pulled up outside the building. Lillian grips the edge of the desk. Who is that? Sebastian doesn't answer. Because he already knows. The alarm's wailing siren drowns out everything: rational thought, strategy, even the tight grip of fear winding itself around Lillian's ribs. Sebastian moves fast, his fingers flying over the security panel, silencing the noise with a single command. The penthouse plunges into an eerie quiet, save for the hum of the security feed still flickering on his screen. Outside, the SUV sits idling, its dark windows impenetrable. No one steps out. Lillian's pulse pounds. Who is that? Sebastian doesn't answer. He doesn't have to. A moment later, his phone vibrates on the desk. A single name flashes across the screen. Natalia. Lillian watches as he hesitates before answering, the muscle in his jaw tightening. Are you really going to make me wait in the car like some common criminal? Natalia's voice drips with irritation, as if she's been inconvenienced by the entire ordeal, as if her exposure as a fraud and an embezzler is nothing more than a minor annoyance. Sebastian exhales sharply, pinching the bridge of his nose. Get up here. The elevator doors slide open less than a minute later, and Natalia steps into the room like she owns it. She's still impeccably dressed, her tailored black suit crisp and unbothered, her hair smooth and sleek. Not a single strand is out of place. Sebastian folds his arms. Talk. Natalia doesn't look at Lillian. Doesn't acknowledge her at all. She sets her purse on the desk, taking her time removing a pair of leather gloves from her fingers, like she's settling in for a leisurely conversation. Clara had information, she says. Dangerous information. Lillian clenches her fists. About your embezzlement? Natalia smiles, slow and sharp. Among other things. Sebastian narrows his eyes. What do you mean? Natalia lets out a soft sigh, finally turning to face him. Do you honestly think Clara was just some innocent little wife, completely oblivious to the world around her? She was smart, Sebastian. Too smart. And she got curious about things that didn't concern her. Sebastian shakes his head. That doesn't explain why she was running. Natalia tilts her head. Doesn't it? Lillian steps forward. She wasn't just running from you. Natalia's lips press together. Lillian's heart races. Someone else was after her. Natalia exhales through her nose, as if weighing whether or not to continue. Then, finally, she speaks. She had evidence that could destroy our family business, she says, her voice quieter now, but no less controlled. And yes, she was going to use it. But I wasn't the only one who wanted to stop her. Sebastian watches her, eyes dark with something unreadable. What are you saying? Natalia hesitates. Lillian swallows. You didn't cause the accident. Natalia exhales sharply, exasperated. If I wanted Clara gone, would have handled it in a way that didn't nearly burn the entire family down with it. Sebastian looks at her with something dangerously close to disbelief. That's your defense? That if you had done it, you would have done it better? Natalia lifts a shoulder. You know me. Lillian can't tear her gaze away. Then who? Natalia doesn't answer right away. She presses her lips together, something flickering behind her eyes, annoyance, calculation. I don't know, she admits, finally. But what I do know is that Clara was in trouble long before that crash. Someone wanted her silenced. Sebastian turns away, hands on his hips, exhaling slowly like he's trying to ground himself in something, anything solid. Lillian grips the edge of the desk. What if it wasn't an accident? Sebastian turns to her, his face pale. And for the first time, Lillian sees it, the fear settling into his bones, the realization that they might not be done uncovering the truth. That they might not be safe at all. The cafe is nearly empty, just a few scattered tables occupied by people too distracted to notice the tension in the air. Lillian sits near the back, her hands curled around a mug of coffee she has no intention of drinking. Across from her, Everett leans back in his chair, watching her with the kind of cautious curiosity that comes from a man who knows too much. He doesn't look how she expected. Clara's supposed confidant isn't some grizzled investigator or a sleek businessman caught up in something dangerous. He's just a guy. Mid-40s, graying at the temples, a little rough around the edges but not unkind. He looks like someone who fixes things for a living, someone who's spent more time working with his hands than sitting in boardrooms. But there's something else, too, something in his gaze that says he's seen more than he lets on. "You don't look like Clara," he says finally, stirring his coffee. Lillian tenses. "I know." Everett sighs, rubbing a hand over his jaw. "I told her not to dig too deep," he mutters. "But she didn't listen." Lillian leans in. What was she looking for? Everett watches her for a moment, as if deciding whether or not she deserves the truth. Then, slowly, he reaches into his jacket and pulls out a small, silver flash drive. He sets it on the table between them. "She knew something was wrong," he says. "She thought someone was watching her. Following her." Lillian swallows. "Was someone?" Everett nods. "She hired a private investigator. Told me she needed someone who could dig without being noticed. The guy she found was good, real good. But then, one day, she just stopped talking about it. Stopped mentioning him altogether." Lillian's pulse kicks up. "What happened?" Everett exhales. "I don't know," he admits. "She never told me. Just said if anything ever happened to her, I needed to keep this safe." Lillian stares at the flash drive. Everett taps it once with his finger. "She recorded something," he says. "Told me not to watch it. Said it was only for when things went bad." Lillian doesn't realize she's holding her breath until he pushes the drive toward her. "She trusted you," he says. "So whatever's on there, it's yours now." Lillian takes it, her fingers closing around the small piece of metal. Everett watches her carefully. "Just be careful," he says. Lillian nods, slipping the flash drive into her pocket. She doesn't know what she'll find. But she knows one thing: Clara left this behind for a reason. And now, she has no choice but to find out why. The penthouse feels colder than usual. Lillian grips the flash drive so tightly in her palm that the edges dig into her skin. Sebastian stands beside her, his jaw set, his entire body radiating tension. Across from them, Natalia sits perched on the edge of the couch, utterly unbothered, swirling a glass of red wine in her hand like this is nothing more than a minor inconvenience. "This again?" Natalia sighs, lifting the glass to her lips. "I thought we were done with this little game." Sebastian doesn't move. "You knew Clara was trying to leave." Natalia raises a perfectly arched brow. "Clara was always dramatic." "She had evidence," Lillian says, stepping forward. "About the money." "About you." Natalia tilts her head slightly, feigning boredom. "Is that so?" Sebastian pulls the folder from his coat and tosses it onto the coffee table. The papers fan out, displaying the neatly printed transaction records, the offshore accounts, Clara's name stamped onto documents she never would have touched. Natalia's expression doesn't change. "How tedious." Lillian's breath hitches. "You laundered money through her." Natalia sets down her wine glass and smooths an invisible wrinkle from her skirt. "Let's say, hypothetically, that I did," she muses. "That doesn't mean I had anything to do with her accident." Sebastian's fists clench. "You let her think she was going to walk away." Natalia exhales. "She was never going to walk away." Lillian's heart pounds. "Because you wouldn't let her?" Natalia finally looks up, her expression unreadable. "Because someone else wouldn't." Silence stretches between them. Lillian exchanges a glance with Sebastian before slowly reaching into her pocket and pulling out the flash drive. "Clara recorded something," she says, voice steady. "Whatever she found out, she wanted someone to see it." For the first time, something flickers across Natalia's face. Sebastian crosses to the laptop on the desk, plugging the flash drive into the port. The screen illuminates, files appearing in a neat, organized row. Video. Documents. Bank transfers. One file labeled Simply Watch Me. Lillian clicks it. Clara appears on the screen. Her face is shadowed, her expression tense. She's wearing a sweater, her hair pulled back hastily, the dim light making her look exhausted, scared. "If you're watching this," Clara says, her voice barely above a whisper, "I didn't survive." Lillian's stomach drops. Sebastian doesn't move. Clara exhales shakily. "I was wrong to think I could fix this. That I could get out clean. Someone is watching me. I can feel it." She pauses, pressing her lips together. "It's not Natalia." Natalia scoffs from behind them. "Told you." Clara's voice wavers. "It's Victor." Sebastian stiffens. Lillian frowns. "Who is Victor?" Sebastian's hands curl into fists. "Victor Laurent." Natalia watches him, expression unreadable. "You already knew, didn't you?" Sebastian exhales sharply. "He's been circling our family for years. Business deals. Investments. He always wanted more control, but our father never let him in." Lillian swallows. "And now?" Sebastian's voice is grim. "Now, he runs everything." The weight of it settles over them. Clara knew something Victor didn't want getting out. And now Clara is gone. The air shifts. A sound, muffled footsteps outside the penthouse door. Sebastian moves first, shutting the laptop, stuffing the flash drive into his pocket. Then, the lights flicker. Lillian's breath catches. Natalia stands, smoothing down her skirt. "Well," she says lightly, "it seems we have company." The security system beeps twice before the door unlocks with a quiet click. Lillian turns just as the door swings open. A man in a dark suit steps inside. Then another. And another. Sebastian grabs Lillian's wrist, pulling her behind him. Victor Laurent enters last, adjusting the cuffs of his jacket. His presence fills the room like a slow-moving storm, calm, controlled, inevitable. He glances around, eyes skimming over the evidence on the coffee table, the laptop, the open folder. Then, he smiles. "Well," Victor says, his voice smooth as silk. "This is unfortunate." The moment Victor steps into the room, Lillian knows they have seconds, maybe less. His men, dressed in tailored suits that do nothing to soften the threat they carry, spread out like a silent, well-trained unit. The air shifts. The door is still open, but it might as well be locked. Victor tugs at the cuff of his sleeve, taking his time, his movements precise. "You've put me in a difficult position," he says, his tone almost conversational. His gaze flicks towards Sebastian, then to Lillian. "I assume you've both been very busy." Sebastian shifts slightly, just enough to put himself between her and Victor. "We know what you did," he says. Victor tilts his head, amusement flickering across his face. "Do you?" Lillian grips the flash drive in her pocket, her heart hammering. "Clara had proof," she says. "You were laundering money through the company, and when she found out, you had her killed." Victor exhales, a small, almost disappointed sigh. "Killed?" He tuts, shaking his head. Such an ugly word. Clara was unfortunate. But let's not get carried away. Lillian clenches her jaw. "She was going to expose you." Victor's lips press together, as if considering. "And now you are," he says. Sebastian shifts again, just slightly, his muscles tensed. Lillian feels it before it happens. The moment Victor lifts his hand, his men move. Sebastian grabs Lillian's wrist, yanking her toward the hallway. A crash behind them, Victor's men overturn the coffee table, reaching for them. Lillian stumbles but keeps moving. The door. Sebastian shoves it open, dragging her out into the corridor. Footsteps pound behind them, shouts echoing. They run. The elevator is too far. The stairwell, Sebastian wrenches open the door, pushing her ahead of him. Down. 4 flights, 3, 2. The garage. Sebastian slams into the emergency exit, setting off another alarm. The sound drowns out everything else. Lillian gasps for air as they burst into the cold night, feet pounding against wet pavement. A black car screeches around the corner. Sebastian yanks her toward the side alley, barely avoiding the headlights. They keep running. Lillian doesn't know how far they go before they stop. A side street. A door with no sign, a bar maybe, neon lights flickering in the window. Sebastian pulls out his phone, cursing under his breath. Lillian grabs his arm. We can't run forever. Sebastian exhales sharply. What do you suggest? Lillian's hand tightens around the flash drive. We take him down. Sebastian stares at her. How? She swallows hard. We release it. Sebastian exhales. You're talking about going public. Lillian nods. It's the only way. Sebastian doesn't argue. It takes 5 minutes. Clara's files. The recordings. The documents. Sent. To every major news outlet. The effect is immediate. Phones start buzzing. The city, already alive, seems to hold its breath. Sebastian lets out a slow, shaky exhale. Lillian stares at the screen, at the message now sent. It's done. The next morning, the scandal explodes. Victor's empire fractures. His name, his company, plastered across every screen, every front page. He is finished. But when they see him next, standing at the edge of the street, watching them, Lillian knows he isn't done. Victor smiles. You were never meant to take her place, he says, voice smooth as ever. Lillian's breath catches. If I were you, Victor murmurs, I'd disappear. And then he walks away. The city feels different now. The air is still thick with the remnants of scandal, Victor's empire collapsing, Natalia's name dragged through the mud, but for the first time in weeks, no one is chasing them. No more hidden threats, no more secrets lurking in the dark. It should be a relief. It isn't. Lillian stands by the window of Sebastian's penthouse, watching the skyline blur into the horizon. The weight of exhaustion sits heavy in her bones. Sebastian is behind her, quiet. The kind of silence that feels deliberate. He hasn't spoken much since it all unraveled, since Victor walked away with his parting words still hanging in the air like an unfinished sentence. She exhales slowly. So, what happens now? Sebastian is sitting on the couch, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. He doesn't answer right away. When he finally does, his voice is low. You tell me. Lillian turns. His face is drawn, tired, but his eyes are sharp. She waits, but he doesn't look away. I know you're not Clara. The words land with quiet finality. Not an accusation. Not a question. Just a truth that has finally been spoken aloud. Lillian's throat tightens. She could lie. She could tell him she doesn't know what he's talking about, could pretend for just a little longer. But there's no point anymore. You've known? She asks. Sebastian leans back against the couch, rubbing a hand over his face. I think part of me knew from the beginning, he admits. It didn't make sense. None of it did. But I wanted it to. He lets out a hollow laugh. I wanted to believe that maybe it was the accident, that maybe something had just shifted. Lillian swallows. And now? Sebastian looks at her. Now, I don't care. The confession knocks the air from her lungs. Sebastian stands, crossing the space between them. It doesn't matter who you were before, he says. It doesn't change what's happened. It doesn't change this. Lillian wants to argue, wants to tell him that it does matter, that she is not Clara, that this life is not hers to keep. But the words don't come. Because when she looks at him, when she lets herself really see him, she knows the truth. She loves him. It's terrifying. She never meant for this to happen. She never asked for this, never wanted to be trapped in someone else's story. And yet, here she is, standing in a life that is no longer a stranger's. A life that could be hers if she let it. But then there's Ivy. The thought slices through her, sharp and immediate. Ivy, with her big, curious eyes. Ivy, who sleeps curled up with a stuffed rabbit that's been falling apart for years. Ivy, who once told her she didn't need a dad because she already had the best mom in the world. Lillian presses a hand to her forehead, her chest tightening. Sebastian watches her. He already knows. You're thinking about her, he says quietly. Lillian nods, unable to speak. Sebastian exhales. You miss her. The words are simple, but they crack something inside her. She loves him. But she is Ivy's mother. And she cannot be both. The choice is impossible. And yet, she knows she has to make it. The sound comes first. A steady, rhythmic beep. A murmur of voices. The hum of fluorescent lights overhead. The smell of antiseptic lingers in the air, sharp and unmistakable. The world is slow to take shape, like stepping into a memory that hasn't quite settled yet. Lillian blinks. The ceiling is white. Too white. The walls are bare, the air too still. A hospital. Then, warmth. A small hand wrapped tightly around hers, gripping like it might never let go. She turns her head, and there she is. Ivy. Tears streak her daughter's face, her little body trembling, her lip quivering as she stares at Lillian with wide, disbelieving eyes. Mom, Ivy breathes, voice breaking. You're back. Lillian's throat closes. Everything rushes in at once, the accident, the crash, the headlights, the impossible other life. But none of it matters, not now, not when Ivy is here, real and warm and crying and holding onto her like she's afraid to let go. Lillian lifts a weak hand, brushing damp strands of hair from Ivy's face. Her body feels heavy, sluggish, like it's been asleep for days. Maybe it has. I'm here, she whispers. I'm right here. Ivy lets out a sob, burying her face in Lillian's arm, her small fingers clinging to the hospital blanket. I missed you, she hiccups. I was so scared. Lillian kisses the top of Ivy's head, her own eyes burning. I'm okay, she murmurs. I promise. She doesn't know if it's a lie. The door opens. A nurse steps in, holding a clipboard, smiling gently. Good to see you awake, Miss Hart, she says. You gave everyone quite a scare. Lillian nods faintly, still trying to find her footing in reality. The nurse checks the machines, adjusts the scribbles something onto the chart. Then, she reaches into the pocket of her scrubs and pulls out an envelope. This was left for you, she says, placing it on the bedside table. Lillian stares at it. The handwriting on the front is neat. Precise. Sebastian Laurent. Her breath catches. The nurse gives her a knowing look before stepping out of the room, leaving her alone with Ivy and the letter. Ivy sniffs, rubbing at her nose. Mom? Lillian swallows hard. I just need a second, sweetheart. Ivy nods and rests her head against Lillian's shoulder, still clutching her hand like she's afraid she'll disappear again. Lillian reaches for the envelope with a trembling hand, breaking the seal with careful fingers. A single slip of paper slides out. 5 words. If this is real, come find me. Her breath shudders. She presses the note to her chest, heart pounding. She didn't lose him. Not yet. And she knows, the story isn't over.